मायूसी अपने शहर की उबरे दराज से नाम के लायक को चार थे, वो आरज़ू में गुजर गए, 2 मैच ले गए। Let me introduce Ashok. I mean, since he has already spilled the beans by saying we've known each other from 1984, let me share certain formal details about him. He is a distinguished professor emeritus at University of California, Berkeley. He was also a faculty. Yeah, I think you both can hear me, so everybody else.
I'm not so bad. I'm not so bad in English. So mic is not working, but we are audible.
Yeah, that's it. So there is a mic here. And he was also a faculty senior scientist at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, where I met him. What he did recently was something which triggered an award for him. So on 24th October 23, he was honored at the White House by the President of US of A, President Biden, with the National Medal of Technology and Innovation, which is US's highest award. He's known for many innovations that we will talk about, but I'll point out one specific one. But before that, he did his master's from IIT Kanpur, and then later the PhD in physics from UC Berkeley, and then we stayed on there. But he came briefly to India, and he was working in Tehri. That is where we met each other first. And it was, we hit it out pretty well because some of our discussions spanned over, for example, our go to the hotel he was staying at 10:30 in the night after finishing my meeting. Then we will discuss till about 3 o'clock in the morning, and then I will drop him to the airport, come back to Odisha Bhavan and sleep for long. So many interesting discussions. But one relevant point today is that we tried unsuccessfully propagating a UV water filter way back in 1985 in Odisha. And that probably taught him quite a few interesting lessons why technology doesn't disseminate in our system. And this was probably the peak of his efforts in developmental engineering. And very recently, he, with a couple of his colleagues, brought out a book, e-book essentially from Springer on development engineering, which initially when it hit about 40,000 downloads, we said, wow. It crossed 50,000, we said, wow, wow. And then it crossed 1 lakh, 80,000, 90,000, that's the last what I heard. So how many wow, wow, wow? Okay. So without much ado, I think I'll invite Ashok. I have heard his talks absolutely delightful, so I'm sure you'll be able to enjoy that. So,
Thank you very much. Okay, here we go. Since the title is over-ambitious and time is short, allow me to cut out the middle part, which is my journey, because that's kind of autobiographical. It's least interesting of the 3 parts. So I'll start by describing what's development engineering and what it is not, and give just 2 examples, kind of bookends to my, almost bookends. One is a little bit after I started working in the field back in 1995, and then the second one is the work I did maybe in 2016-17. There are efforts done before and after these bookend parts as well, and a lot of stuff in between. But for you, what is interesting it is to basically ask, so what does it mean? What are your learnings? What is your takeaway? That's, I hope, is of interest to you. And what is of interest to me for sure is your pushback and your questions and your challenging ideas that I want to present to you. And some of those ideas you may not agree with, some of them you will say, God knows what this guy is talking about, but let's see how it goes. Okay. So, first of all, the word engineering is not based on the word engines. Okay. It's something I learned much later after I started doing this. It turns out that the word engineering is based on the word ingenuity or ingenious. And it predates very substantially any kind of modern engines. So I used to think that engineers is the guy with a screwdriver who keeps the engine running, you know. That's not the case. It's the guy who's ingenious, guys and gals, who are ingenious, who solve problems, who solve hard problems, which the rest of society kind of looks to them to solve. So that's the signature thing about engineers. Is not about engines, it's about solving hard problems. Look it up. It was comes from Middle English before there were any modern engines. And there's a French root and so on. So it's manipulation of matter, energy and information to advance human goals, to advance human intentionality, and like my friend Kentaro Koyama likes to say, all technology is about human intentionality. There may be some unintentional consequences for sure, but the key thing is not going to go in the direction that you do not intend to go. You are going to shape it to deliver human intentionality. Okay? And that's why, much to my regret, a lot of engineers, the big majority of them, end up in the basement, end up in the boiler room, because they delegate their intentionality to factors outside their control. They delegate it to those who pay them a salary or who tell them what to do, and it ends up that human intentionality part is done by the CEO or by some babu, and the engineer just builds a bridge where it was wanted, or builds an airport where it was wanted, right? So that's part of the downside of it. Takes on and solves challenging hard problems, and build bridges, makes us fly, on and on and on, design, build and operate all kinds of things in modern society. And this is a short summary of where we were in terms of modern society in 2019. And of course we were emitting lots of CO2 into the air, and you see some of the numbers there. In fact, 2019 anthropogenic carbon emissions were 100 times larger than the background natural carbon emissions by nature. So you are 100-fold out of balance with long-term equilibrium of the environment. And what I want to draw your attention to are two significant words here. One is for carbon budget, right? And the carbon budget, now I got to rewind a little bit because maybe it's not something everybody in the room knows. Carbon budget is the amount of CO2 left, the room left in the atmosphere for additional emissions of CO2 before you hit a trigger point, 50% probability that you'll cross the trigger point. So the carbon budget for 1.5 degrees Celsius is tiny. It's going to be gone in 6 years. And the major emitters who have filled up the CO2 in the atmosphere, the Annex 1 countries, the industrialized countries, are not slowing down. Our CO2 emissions curve has relentlessly kept on increasing. And the carbon budget for 2 degrees C, by the way, because of statistical uncertainties and disagreements between models, the carbon budget is set for a 50% chance. You can look it up. So carbon budget for 50% chance of hitting 2C is only 1200 gigatons of CO2, which means that at current emission rate of 50 gigatons of CO2 per year, even if we stop any further increase, which is relentless, unless there is a huge recession or something like that, or a COVID, right? At 50 gigatons per year, you got only 24 years left. And the reason 2 degrees Celsius is important is because lots of people believe, atmospheric scientists and environmental scientists believe, that 2 degrees Celsius is a point where irreversible tipping points will be crossed, such as a vast release of methane from the tundra, or such as loss of ice caps in Greenland and Antarctica, and they won't come back, at least for a few thousand years. So vast big sea level rises and so on. So in other words, time is run out already for 1.5 and it's almost run out for 2. So it looks like in your lifetime, my lifetime too, we're going to shoot past 1.5 for sure, and 2 and more. So that is one side of the picture, okay? So bear that in mind as we think about development engineering. The second side of the picture is something called planetary boundaries. Just to calibrate myself, how many of you have read about planetary boundaries? Raise your hands, please. Okay, maybe 10%. So, environmental scientists have identified a place or trigger points or tipping points in different domains, in 9 different domains, where human interference with the environment will cause irreversible harm of a magnitude where human civilization from scratch will be unable to restart. We have started at one point, we are here now, and suppose there was some magic, we were all wiped out, we could restart again in terms of having agriculture being discovered and so on, so long as there is a DNA of humankind left. But human civilization cannot be restarted if you exceeded that what is called safe operating space for humanity. Out of 9, 6 were exceeded in 2023. They are shown in red. And we push against those boundaries all the time, such as the loss of biodiversity, pollution with PFAS chemicals or plastics. You can read the details, all right? And this is the DOI for Science Advances 2023, which will give you more details if you like in terms of planetary boundaries. So the time remaining is short on one hand, in terms of CO2 alone, but it's also short in terms of actually bad things happening in terms of environmental stability around the planet in different dimensions. Now I come back to the subject matter of development engineering to be poverty. And the World Bank says near destitute people, how many of them are there, and where do they live? Okay? Just 5 countries account for 50% of the near destitute or destitute people on the planet. The list starts with India, followed by others. This is from World Bank numbers. But this is just attributing it to countries as to where they live. More importantly to me is the issue of development. Back to engineers taking on tough challenges, saying that if development is freedom, and if development is the loftiest of societal goals for developing countries, then I would argue that development is too very important to be left to non-engineers alone. Okay? And the argument I make is not just a Amartya Sen's argument, but also looking at what's the economic distribution on the planet. Here is the income distribution on the planet, ironically called the champagne glass of income, because it looks like the champagne glass. Okay. Each thin black line represents a quantile or 20% of the population. This is for the whole planet, human beings. The bottom 20% earn 2% of the planetary income. All the way going up to the bottom 80% doesn't add up too much. And even that 70% for the top quintile, you can see how skewed that distribution is in terms of income. So, again the argument is the money is not trickling down. Development, healthcare, human rights are not trickling down. And wealth distribution, well, here is the Human Development Index in terms of, Human Development Index is compiled by the UNDP, United Nations Development Program. India falls down here, 80%, or sorry, 0.8 and up is called very high human development. They are almost exclusively first world countries. Add up to about 1 billion people out of 8. India is, and there are many others who deserve to be at 0.8 in terms of their healthcare, their education, in terms of their human rights, in terms of their literacy and opportunities to thrive to their potential. And they are not going to go up there with 24 years left for CO2 emissions or whichever way you want to look at it. And the wealth distribution is even worse. This number changes from year to year based on the number 8. Changes from year to year if you follow Oxfam. Yeah. Oops, I'm running out of power for some reason. That's a bad thing to happen in the beginning of the talk. Yeah, that's good. No, now it does, so I need to give it some support in the bottom maybe. Thank you for noticing that I was lost. Perfect. Very good. Thank you so much. That's why the computer was behaving in a troubling way, because it had run out of power from my previous talk. Here we are. So, the top number might, the 8 richest might change to 10 or 15 or even 50 or 100. The point remains that the bottom 4 billion people have as much wealth as maybe the top 50. Okay? Now, this is a famous quote from Richard Feynman at the time of the Challenger disaster, but I love it because a lot of people get into development engineering because of PR. And Feynman's quote comes out of his analysis of the Challenger disaster, which the government wanted to suppress. And they refused to include his analysis that the Challenger disaster originated because of frozen O-rings on the booster. So a great thing happened. Feynman wouldn't sign the main report, and the government wouldn't let him write his conclusions in the main report, so they had to reach a compromise, which was that he was allowed to write an appendix F, or personal observations, by Richard Feynman, which attracted everybody's attention, much to the embarrassment of those who wanted his opinion to be suppressed. But the fact being, back to this relevance, is that development engineering is not about PR, which means that measuring whether you achieved what you wanted to achieve and being transparent about it, just like as you would be for any other engineering project, is part of the core of a discipline that we would like you to talk about, think about practice, it is not about just feel good. It's not about charity. It's not about feeling good about yourself. It's about changing the world. And you can't fool anybody with that unless with somebody testing it with measurable outcomes. So here we have all the sustainable development goals agreed upon by the UN, signed upon by all countries. And some scholars are already saying that they are incompatible with keeping within the planetary boundaries. Because sustainable development goals were aspirational. That is what everybody wanted. Sure, tathastu, let us have it, amen. But the question is, are they practical? Are you going to get there from here? It looks like we can't. And which also means that the argument that you should just tell the people, I shouldn't call them at the bottom of the pyramid because they are bottom 80% of the people. You saw that graph, the champagne graph, okay? To tell them to just wait until prosperity or well-being trickles down to them is bogus. There is this guy called Walt Rostow who talks about the poor should wait for trickle-down prosperity so they will eventually get into a high human development level. Ideas or propaganda or promotion of ideas like that ignores the fact of neocolonialism. It ignores the fact that we have in the world military dictatorships installed in countries from where resources have to be extracted, where human rights are trampled not because they will ever trickle down, because a particular maybe multinational corporations wants to make sure that fruit out of Guatemala is not taxed by the Guatemalan government. Okay? So there is no trickle down and there is no time. So my argument is, look at what other people have done and other approaches. But we would like to argue that one needs to identify what are the constraints for poverty, and one needs to identify what are the desperate problems of the bottom half of the world's population, which are not even on the horizon of the people in the first world or the elite in the developing world. Okay? The problems of safe drinking water or inhalation of smoke or children dying of cold are not on the horizon of the elite in the first world, elite in the third world and common people in the first world. And development engineering aims to address those problems with technological innovation and ways to replicate it to have society scale impact and verify that. Okay? Trying and failing is not something to be ashamed about. Not even trying is the thing that I want to question. So a definition of development engineering is a discovery of technological solutions that sustainably and reproducibly improve development outcomes at scale. I tell my students, don't take on a problem for your PhD unless you can tell me with some persuasion that if you are successful technically, assuming you are, it's okay if you are not, at least 10 million people on the planet will benefit. Don't do boutique problems. Don't do something in the corner of a sandbox. Take on the problem, if successful, if scaled up, will really make a difference. Now that is one of your selection criteria of what problem you want to take on. And then you have to figure out how will you scale it up. Okay? What it is not. It is not throwing money at a problem. Here is an example of the Millennium Villages. It's not examples like you have heard of Play Pump, the ridiculous project where children were given these roundabout wheels and they were supposed to run around pushing the wheels around in circle attached to which was a groundwater pump, with which they pumped the groundwater up into a tank, and thus you got children to pump water for the village. When I saw it, I knew it's not going to work. Children want to play. They are not some bullock type to go around thing called a play pump. The socket is like that. It is a soccer ball or football, as we call it in India, with inertially positioned mass that charges a battery, so that if you kick around the ball, children kick around the socket ball, and then charge the battery, and then adults plug in the little socket and give LED light for their home, and big mess. Doesn't work. Doesn't work in terms of, it's impractical. The kids don't want it. They just want to have fun. It's okay. Okay? So that's not what we want. Here are the defining features. It's got to be scalable. We talked about that. It is hypothesis based in the sense that your mindset is a learning mindset. You're willing to say, let me try this. Does it work? If it doesn't work, you're willing to say, it didn't work. Okay? So it's a learning mindset, and the hypothesis is hard to read in the kind of white thing, but the hypothesis testing has a broad range. It includes randomized controlled trials if you have the resources and the time to do it. But if you don't, like in my case when I was working on stoves for Darfur refugee women, I just had to decide things on the fly and try it out, and it worked. But I didn't have time to do RCT. That's okay. Right? But now there are some 65,000 of those stoves in Africa. So this hypothesis based is channel agnostic, because once you have a solution, how to take it to scale requires a channel. And the channel could be markets, startup, business, could be government, or could be non-profits or non-profit institutions, right? So we are not tied to saying, oh, all profit is bad, because hey, even malnourished children in Africa are fed Coca-Cola because everybody makes a dime along the way, except the child, of course, and their mom, who bought it. But point is, it just shows you the power of everybody making a dime along the way, right? So it's fine. If they make profit, that's what works, that won't work. The whole world runs on making profit. So don't start with the mindset that it must be not for profit, or it must be, we don't care. Solve the problem, man, go on, right? It should be generalizable and has to therefore have interdisciplinary breadth in your solution. You need to think not just about engineering, but about social sciences, and lastly sustainable. Okay? So broadly speaking, the approach is nested loops of innovation, implementation, evaluation, adaptation, with actually testing at each loop, but also testing across the loops as you have this circular learning curve that is hopefully a virtuous circle. And it doesn't have to be rigidly along that path. You could jump from A to B depending on what circumstances allow. Now that gives you a kind of background of why this book got written, the one which has 190,000 downloads by now. And it's open access, it is free. We paid a fee to make it open access. So the first 4 chapters provide the introduction and the connection between technology and development, and the framework about innovate, iterate, and evaluate. And the 4th chapter is about ethics. And the next 19 chapters are categorized into 6 categories. This is a matter of convenience. But there are 19 case studies. Okay? And you can download it for free from here. So, to start with, the initial idea was we need to have technologies that are affordable. So this is now kind of getting into my trajectory, what I learned. This is what I thought. Saying, yeah, this makes sense. Nobody can pick a quarrel with this. You got to have affordability, you got to have technical effectiveness. You'll be surprised how many technologies claim to work, but they don't, because they are for the poor, and the poor don't complain, Particularly if you are at a non-profit and you take money from some donor and deliver something to the poor don't complain because that's what they got today, they might get something tomorrow, right? So they are quiet. The donor doesn't know any better, and the non-profit in between is in the field of making the donor feel good and giving something to the poor. So unless it is measurable to be technically effective, suspect it. And of course it must work outside the lab. Lots of things work in the lab. Working in the lab is a necessary condition, it's not a sufficient condition. Okay? So these are surely correct but completely inadequate. What I learned is that design thinking and implementation strategy cannot be separated. Your implementation strategy thinking needs to start when you start your thinking about the design. That requires you to go into spaces that for you and for me too at one time we are uncomfortable, because I'm not trained as a businessman, I'm not even trained as an engineer. I'm trained as a physicist who kind of wandered into engineering, looking at the time left for people from my country of origin to get some level of prosperity, and getting really upset to feel at the gut level that we have no time left. And then being told that, yeah, you wait, it will come to you, and realizing that BS. Secondly, social factors are critical, of course, for technology success, as critical as those from engineering. And lastly, there is a huge amount of non-engineering stuff that you must integrate in your thinking for implementation planning when you design the technology, to figure out how is it going to go out and take root and multiply. Because any time you think there is a problem, there is somebody else who is thinking, oh, this is wonderful, this is great, I'm benefiting from it. Okay? So you think somebody needs a bridge, not the guy with the boat who is crossing the river. He says, I don't want a bridge, I want my boat, and I want to make money on it. Right? So you got to figure out what's maintaining the status quo. Who is feeding this status quo? And how am I going to maybe incorporate what they want so that at least we neutralize them? All of that goes into your implementation. So one requirement, we'll summarize these three, if you will, which is articulate and critically examine your theory of change. By critically examine, I mean you yourself being hostile to your theory of change and trying to poke holes in it, and ask other people to poke holes in it to say, does it make sense? Will it work? What's going on here, right? So if you have a theory of change, then at least there is some hope that you will say, oh, that's not right. Something went wrong here. A doesn't follow on to B, right? It refers to how to, intervention will result in a positive societal outcome. Activity lead to social impact, and that connectivity between your actions and societal impact is the theory of change. It shows a causal relationship between the steps, articulates assumptions, forces you to decide what to do and what not to do, what you want to achieve, and identify necessary factors for your theory to work. Schematically, one would say, you have control on your activities, and therefore you can choose your inputs, and if you are successful, you get some outputs. But the outputs have to lead to an outcome, which is different from simply the output. I design a machine to disinfect water. The outcome has to be in the real world delivery of that water in somebody's cup when they want to drink it, and not get diarrhea. Okay? But from there it has to lead to impact. So there's a lot of causal forces involved in going from the activity and my control on the inputs and my diligence to produce an output. Once I go to the outcome, there are external forces that support it or oppose it. Much like a guy with a boat who doesn't really want to bridge on the river. Okay? And then impact too. So, if you want to read more, by the way, there is a whole lot of stuff. I think I did mention it. Wikipedia has a lot of writing on that, but it's pretty common in social sciences. So I'm going to, as I said, give you only two illustrative innovations about safe drinking water for about 1 billion people who don't have it. And then, again, it comes back to water, about arsenic removal and the water supplies. So context is lots of people don't have safe drinking water, about 2 million annual deaths, mostly of children below age 5. Here is a little girl, 5-year-old Asma, and her mother in Dhaka hospital. The largest, most modern hospital in Dhaka is called Cholera Hospital, because that's how prevalent cholera is. It was established by international agencies for International Center, IC. DD is Diarrhea Disease Research, Bangladesh. The idea was they will build ICDDR in multiple locations, but they built only one, the one in Dhaka. Okay? And the girl is dehydrated. And the mom is given a gruel of boiled rice to feed sugar and boiled rice, to feed to the girl. And as we were watching, the girl was pushing away the bowl all the time and asked my daughter, who was at that time an intern in the hospital, saying, "Can you explain what's going on?" And she said, dehydrated kids are extremely irritable. They don't ever want to even drink water. And they go into a spiral that leads to death. But that's what, like, counterintuitive stuff happens. The whole hospital is covered with, beds. All the beds are covered with a rubber sheet because all the patients in the hospital have died. And they don't want to wash their beds all the time. This whole thing is worth visiting if you go to Dhaka. Now I ended up designing something as a result of a cholera epidemic in Bihar. And 10,000 people died of diarrhea, cholera in Bihar in the month of May that year. And I was doing some aerosol science and at Lawrenceburg, the National Lab, and I was getting frustrated because I was doing something that really felt irrelevant relative to the scale of what people in my home country were undergoing. I said, there's got to be a better way to provide them with safe drinking water that they can afford. And I set up some design criteria, but what I'm going to list you here is not just the design criteria, but also what I achieved at the end of the design. It's a very simple design. The funny thing is nobody worried about it. That's why I ended up doing it. I used to say to myself that a high school physics teacher could have done what I did, but a high school physics teacher doesn't have a lab or resources. And the engineers are trying to make a better toothpaste or build God knows what, the new app for the iPhone, and 10,000 people are dying every month. That's the kind of irony that makes you crazy, saying, what is going on? What are we doing? So 60 watts, like a table lamp in those days, disinfects a ton of water. You must use only reliable, mature components, must be robust, must treat unpressurized water collected by the bucket. 12 seconds is the maximum time. There is no overdose risk, very simple maintenance, and must be fail-safe. So anything breaks, it should stop delivering water, which means there's automatic built-in guarantee that if the water does come through, there it goes. So we built this, we tested it in the lab, we tested it first in India, Uttar Pradesh, Bhubaneswar, Mexico, South Africa, in KwaZulu-Natal. And the lab design and tests were completed in '96. This is what the device looks like. I also had to look at why previous devices failed. It basically works by destroying the DNA of the pathogens, both viruses and bacteria, with UVC radiation, 254 nanometers. The radiation that you make with in-on-tube lights is very cheap to make. Any country, any factory that can make tube lights can make UVC radiation with low pressure mercury arc in copious quantities. And it is extremely effective in destroying DNA. And the reason that happens also is because ozone layer protects all life on Earth from UVC reaching the Earth's surface. So our DNA never had to be exposed to UVC. We could allow that Achilles heel to happen. But now we have UVC manufacturing capacity to destroy the DNA of pathogens and other bacteria and viruses. So it's about the size of a kitchen microwave oven. And factory production, this is made in a factory, year 2000. Here is a woman collecting water, one of the 10 trips she makes from that tank in Bominapadu. That was the place where we first built our first commercial dispensing or selling station for profit by a licensee. And this is what that looks like in 2005. People come to collect the water and it's sold. This is what the inside looks like. It is taken from a nearby lake. The water at that time sold for 10 paise per liter or 1 rupee per liter. Slowly the price has gone up to about 6 rupees for 10 liters. You have to buy only 10 liters, you can't buy smaller amounts. But people buy it. Okay, this pays back the bank. In some time after that, all money goes to the village council. The land is owned by the village council. The property is owned by the village council. The loan is paid back, becomes village property. 2 part-time employees. It got lots of prizes, but that doesn't matter, as we already said. In Ghana, it was in 5 countries. But the place where the most of the installations are, there are a few hundred, not as many as I could have hoped, are in India. This is the 500th center opened in 2012. But we cracked a hard problem because 80% of their customers are below the poverty line of the Indian government, as measured by this Sambodhi, which is the market research organization. In 2015, it was saving about 2,000 statistical lives. No longer a charity. Can go to scale on its own. For most customers, the first time they drink water that is safe at a price that they can afford. Lots of details, but I'll leave that for Q&A. Second is actually work in progress only because the Indian work is complete. This technology is also licensed to an Indian for-profit company called LivePure, and they provide arsenic-safe drinking water to about 5,000 people in a place called Dabdabi, which is 2 hours drive from Calcutta. And then they built a second replicate in Uttar Pradesh, near Nepal border. Oh, by the way, all the work that I discussed here and all the work I've ever done is always been teamwork. So when I say I did it or so on, it doesn't mean I. It always means me plus a whole bunch of others whose list is too long to show here. But without them, I couldn't have achieved any of this stuff. Okay? So as you know, there was a massive switch to tube wells in Bangladesh and India. There were 10 million in Bangladesh alone. Now comes the interesting part. In folks in environmental engineering, there is something called maximum contaminant level, MCL. This is the MCL, this is showing the excess cancer risk, lifetime excess cancer risk by drinking water contaminated at the MCL of these permitted carcinogens, one at a time. Okay? So just to give example, ethylene dibromide at its MCL, lifetime consumption causes 12 excess cancers in 100,000 people. Right? This graph is straightforward. This is taken from Science, from Alan Smith's work. And now I'm going to change the scale and show you arsenic at its MCL. I change the scale, so these things have almost disappeared. That's arsenic at its MCL. 712 cancers per 100,000 people at a level permitted by the WHO. Thank you. And horrible consequences for those who don't die. Internal cancers always means in rural areas too late to detect. People had given donations of filters which within 1 year had failed. 95% of them failed within 1 year because there was no societal integration. These technologies all worked in the lab, but nobody had thought about the theory of change. Who will maintain it? Who will replace their adsorbent? Who will be responsible for collecting a small fee to replace whatever has to be replaced? Okay? So we ended up doing something where we dissolve Fe2 in the water. Fe2 turns to Fe3. Fe3 hydrates, becomes Fe3 oxides, captures phosphates, silicates, and arsenic, coagulates, settles out, and you get clean drinking water. So I'll skip all this stuff. We built this big prototype in Jadavpur University with my 2 students. Both of them have finished their PhD long ago now. Did I run out of power? No. Something else happened. I don't know what happened. I hope. Okay. We got to repeat the last mirror displays. Maybe mirror displays, no? Nah, that doesn't seem to work. Hang in there. Now I know I think what to do. Go to full screen and pop it back in. There. Yeah, 30 seconds lost, sorry about it. So, this was tested in the school. You see the test in the school. At WWP High School, here is the results. You see that starting with 250 ppb, we got less than 5 ppb in WWP over several months. Nobody was allowed to drink that water. Threw it away. Then we scaled that up, and now you see the reactor size behind me over there in the blue tank. There are 2 reactors like that, and they produce enough water, 10,000 liters a day, and it's clean, and people get electronic cards with which they collected. Students and staff get it free in exchange for giving us a room to build this. Up to this point, nobody got to drink the water on that side. After we were confident, then they got to drink the water here. We are well below WHO MCL, raw water is still 250 ppb. We handed that off to a private sector licensee in January of 2017, and they have been running it ever since, providing safe drinking water for a fee, and then they replicated that one. So the lifetime cancer risk went from 18,000 all the way down to about 0.7 per 100 at 10 ppb. And actually this water is even less than that. And it's financially viable and scalable, not serving more than 10,000 people, 5,000 in UP and 5,000 in West Bengal. But we made a point that it works. It's scalable, is valid, it works for 5 years on its own. So recap on the lessons learned is define your theory of change. End of slides, that's where I want to stop. But I do want to talk about at least poor economics and the poverty trap is one of the important things I try to tell my students, that don't blame the poor, realize from work that is accessible to you, from Nobel laureate economists who wrote it for you to read, that there is something called poverty trap. That is experimentally proven by people who are just academics, that people who are trapped in poverty indeed are actually trapped there. A small perturbation will return them back to the poverty equilibrium point. And there are ways to move them out, one of which is to use your engineering or development engineering skills to kick them off that equilibrium point to get them to the next equilibrium. Okay? I think there's a whole bunch of goofball things, but I want to stop here. I will take questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Gadni, for that absolutely amazing talk and so many insights and so much interesting work. So we'll open the house up for questions, and like we do in Sitara, we'll give the first chance to students within Sitara, which often is very difficult to get Sitara students to ask, but maybe others. So I'll come there. Yeah, I also need help those on the mic. Yeah. Okay, so at the very end.
Yeah, you can pass them. Yeah.
Akash, come middle line.
Yeah. So then,
Also introduce yourself, please.
so hello sir, am I audible now? Audible, yeah. Good evening sir. My name is Akash Pastava and I'm a second year master's student here at Sitara. So sir, my query is regarding capacity building that we are having in terms of this development engineering. So like sir, according to you, as per whatever case studies you went through on ground and on paper as well, what do you think like are the best strategy for capacity building so that we could have that maintenance cycle all over in our project? Like, just wanted to know the best strategy for the capacity building is something.
Good question. I think, let me understand, let me make sure I understand your question. By capacity building, you mean the ability of the intended beneficiaries or intended target population to socially integrate the technology in their daily life.
Like more on sir, in terms of whether are they able to make it a circular way, like once for 1 year they were able to handle all this stuff, for the second year when the machinery is getting depreciated or they need maintenance.
Sure.
So is there any chance of making the capacity building so that they itself make it come, like they do not need any external
Good
support
question.
to make.
Good question. So, if I understand right, the question is capacity building to the level of self-sufficiency
Yeah,
in the organization, in the community.
yeah,
No,
exactly.
I do not aim for it, and I want to argue forcefully against it. When I use this ballpoint pen and it runs out, I don't try to fill it with ink. I buy a refill, okay? And there is a reason why I buy a refill. My argument is to think about some misguided, I claim it misguided, idea of Gandhian self-sufficiency at a community level. Means I make my own cloth with my own hand-spun fiber, and I stitch my own shirt, and I stitch my own shoes, and then I have no time left. This is not how it works. The reason we are in this room is not because somebody self-sufficiently does it. We divide and conquer. We have skills which are highly specialized. And these highly specialized skills allow us to do what we do best, on scale, with economies of scale, with amazing economies of scale, right? If you read the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx, he praises capitalism for discovering this truth. He effusively praises it because it is not feudal anymore. It is not handicraft. It is industrial production. That's how we'll get out of that HBI problem. That's my thinking. Not by utopian community level self-sufficiency.
Yeah, anyone else? Any other question? You introduce yourself.
Thank you, sir, for the talk. I'm a first-year master student here at Sitara. My question to you would be on the point you raised about industrial capitalism as well as community growth. I wanted to know from your experience, what would you say is the balance between these two? Because what we've understood, at least from the course and also our living, is that capitalism is again inherently exploitative. And when you talk about communities, you cannot, again, as you said, complete self-reliance, but there's again some equilibrium that exists between these two states as well.
Of
And
course.
I just wanted to know your thoughts on this.
No,
What more we could do?
I totally agree that uncontrolled capitalism, unregulated markets are brutal and monstrously exploitative, and money only flows uphill under unregulated markets and brutal naked capitalism. So it doesn't mean, when I praise profit making or I said industrial production, I didn't at all mean to imply that we should worship at the foot of the god of market. No, no, no. It's got to be a force that is controlled. It's not the market should control us. Totally, I agree, yes, of course.
So as in, I meant that we've always talked about, for example, the invisible hand as well, that is supposed to regulate the market, but it is again driven by hard
Invisible hand is bogus.
Yeah.
That's BS.
Exactly.
As
So,
somebody said it long time ago, everybody who watches what happens knows that is BS.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that.
yeah.
Okay? Only people who are extreme right-wing nuts and Rand fans would love that. Okay?
So how
Allow
do
me
we
to be
get...
blunt because I'm